Oh, welcome back. The chaos they doubted, now sculpted into something they can't ignore. They laughed when you started, didn't they? They called it madness, chaos, nonsense, something too unrefined, too wild to ever become art. You could feel their smirks echoing through every hallway, every conversation that twisted your name into a joke. They thought you were lost in your own storm, drowning in ideas no one could understand. But what they didn't see was how you were sculpting your own kind of order from that chaos. Every sleepless night, every tremor of frustration, every time you tore your own work apart to rebuild it stronger, that was you rewriting the rules. Because while they measured sanity by conformity, you measured it by creation, and that difference made them nervous. You weren't losing your mind. You were expanding it. You were letting reality crack open just enough to let the brilliance through. The lines blurred between genius and madness, and somewhere in that thin space, you built something none of them could predict. You were never supposed to fit, you were supposed to redefine what fit even meant. And oh, how they mocked that, how they whispered to each other that you'd gone too far, that you'd lost the plot. But deep down, behind all that noise, there was fear. Because your chaos had rhythm, your insanity had direction. They just couldn't see the pattern yet. You were building something their logic couldn't comprehend, and that's what scared them most. They were seeing a mind that refused to kneel to reason, a creator that didn't ask permission from the laws of normality. You didn't chase approval, you chased truth. And truth has always looked like madness before it becomes history. They didn't believe you because belief is easy when the world makes sense. But your world wasn't supposed to make sense. It was supposed to evolve. You tore through convention, through comfort, through every polite expectation they ever placed on your name. And for a while, yes, it looked like destruction. The kind of destruction that makes people step back, point fingers, whisper warnings, but destruction and creation share the same heartbeat. You were dismantling the limits they worshipped. You were reprogramming your own boundaries. Every failure became a stroke in the painting. Every breakdown became structure. Every doubt they threw became color. You were learning that insanity, real insanity, isn't about losing touch with reality. It's about seeing reality too clearly, too deeply, until it breaks open and reveals its machinery. You saw the gears, the strings, the illusion, and you decided to twist them in your favor. That's why your madness scared them. It wasn't chaos for chaos's sake. It was precision in disguise. You were never out of control. You were operating at a level they hadn't even imagined yet. They called it insanity because they couldn't measure your strategy. And that's exactly why it worked. They wanted your downfall to make sense, but nothing about your rise ever will, because your ascent was born from the impossible. You didn't just endure their disbelief, you weaponized it. Every laugh became fuel, every insult became data, every ounce of doubt became direction. While they sat in their circle of logic, you built a spiral that transcended it. You didn't escape sanity, you outgrew it. They said you were spiraling, but what they didn't realize was that a spiral doesn't always lead down. Sometimes it leads inward, to a center only the few ever reach. You weren't losing control, you were diving into it. You were peeling away the layers of pretense, tearing apart the walls they built between acceptable and impossible. Every smirk they threw your way, every warning they whispered behind your back. It only confirmed one thing. You were moving beyond them. They didn't understand that to build something eternal, you have to go through the collapse. You have to let the old version of yourself burn so something new can rise from its ashes. Oh, they saw the fire all right, but they mistook it for destruction. They couldn't see the blueprint hidden in the smoke. You were designing chaos with purpose. Every wild idea they laughed at, every move that didn't make sense in the moment, every risk that made their jaws drop, all of it was part of the silent architecture of your rebirth. They called it insanity because they couldn't track the rhythm. But deep within that storm of your thoughts, there was symmetry, dangerous, deliberate symmetry. You weren't fighting the system. You were outsmarting it from within. You weren't breaking under pressure. You were bending the universe to your pulse. Oh, and how that terrified them. Because nothing shakes the confident crowd more than realizing the one they called a fool has started dictating reality itself. They wanted you predictable, containable, something they could laugh at without consequence. But instead, you turned their mockery into momentum. Every time they dismissed you, your silence sharpened. Every time they mocked, your focus deepened. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the balance began to shift. Their certainty started to crack. Their laughter didn't sound so sure anymore. They began to sense it, that subtle, unnerving truth. Your chaos had become a map. The madness had taken form. You were no longer wandering through your mind. You were commanding it. You had found rhythm in the noise, and that's when the air began to change. Rooms grew quieter when you entered. Conversations stumbled when your name appeared. They felt something they couldn't articulate. That pull, that gravity, the same energy they once called crazy, now began to feel divine. Like the universe had chosen you as its translator, whispering truths too raw for their ears. You weren't just thinking differently. You were seeing through things. The illusions that kept others comfortable no longer worked on you. You could see every fear hiding behind a smile, every lie wrapped in politeness, every weakness cloaked in power. And oh, you smiled, didn't you? Not out of arrogance, but out of realization, because you finally understood that the line between madness and mastery doesn't exist. It's a story told by the fearful to keep the powerful small. They didn't believe in you? Fine. They believed in order, predictability, obedience. But art, genius, evolution, none of that bows to belief. You didn't need their faith to move forward. You had momentum carved from isolation, built from the echoes of your own thoughts. You had already left their reality behind. You were building your own, and one day, not far from now, the same voices that called you insane will start whispering your words like gospel. Because that's how it always goes, doesn't it? First they laugh at the chaos, then they study the masterpiece. They never saw it coming. The day their mockery became your momentum. The day your silence grew louder than their entire noise-filled world. You remember those nights, don't you? The ones where the room was quiet, but your mind was a storm. Every thought striking like lightning, every doubt daring you to fold. You didn't fold. You let the storm rage until it learned your rhythm, until even the chaos bowed to your control. That's what they'll never understand. You didn't escape the darkness. You negotiated with it. You shook hands with your own demons and made them architects of your destiny. While they sought peace in comfort, you found strength in discomfort. While they searched for applause, you sought transformation. They feared losing control. You feared never finding it. So you stepped into the spiral, deeper and deeper, until the fear itself began to follow your lead. You taught it obedience. You taught it discipline. And from that moment, you were never truly afraid again. Because when you've looked your own insanity in the eyes and it blinked first, you realize the world has nothing left that can truly touch you. Your silence became your weapon. Your unpredictability became your armor. You spoke less, but every word you did say carried a gravity they couldn't handle. You weren't chasing validation anymore. You were rewriting the rules of resonance. Every glance you gave, every pause before a word, carried the weight of 1,000 realizations. People started to sense something. They couldn't describe it, but they felt it. A pull, a shift, the unsettling awareness that your energy had evolved beyond their comprehension. You were no longer reacting to life. Life was reacting to you. And when the whispers began, the ones that said you'd changed, they were right. You had, but not in the way they meant. You hadn't become colder. You'd become clearer. You hadn't lost emotion. You'd refined it into precision. You no longer chased connection. You commanded it. And that scared them, didn't it? The way your eyes saw through the surface, the way your words carried that stillness. That eerie, unshakable calm that comes only from surviving your own destruction. They called you insane because it made them feel safe. But you weren't insane. You were awake. You saw what they refused to see. That the system wasn't designed to reward truth. It was designed to punish it. That's why the ones who see clearly always walk alone at first. Because clarity isolates, vision alienates, and yet it's only the isolated who end up changing everything. Now they look at you differently. The same people who laughed now choose their words carefully. They don't understand why. But something inside them knows. They feel it in the silence between your sentences, in the steadiness of your breath, in the fire behind your restraint. They sense that you've seen something they haven't, that you've crossed a threshold they're still afraid to approach. You've become the paradox they can't explain. Too calm to be broken, too dangerous to be controlled, too quiet to be ignored. You've turned every wound into wisdom, every failure into frequency, every scar into a story. The universe itself leans closer to hear. You were never insane. You were simply operating on a wavelength too sharp for their comfort. And now, the same world that doubted your mind is beginning to orbit around it. They thought they could define you, that their words, their judgment, their shallow understanding could capture the storm inside your skull. But storms don't care for definitions. They rewrite the landscape. You didn't chase control, you became it. Every collapse, every sleepless night, every whisper of madness sculpted the architecture of a mind that no one else could follow. That's why they fear you now, not because you're loud, not because you're violent, but because you're still like the eye of the hurricane that knows it owns the wind. There was a time when you wanted to explain yourself, to prove you weren't the monster they painted you to be, but explanation is for the misunderstood. And you are no longer misunderstood. You've transcended the need to be known. Now you move through the world like a riddle no one can solve. And that's your power. They see fragments of you. A glance, a smirk, a word, but never the whole picture. You became ungraspable, untouchable, unstoppable. Because they can't destroy what they can't define. You started noticing how the game was played. The subtle manipulations, the masks everyone wore to survive. The weak wanted applause, the strong wanted control. But you wanted truth. You wanted to tear the mask from reality and see what bled underneath. And when you did, you found the most dangerous secret of all. It was all theater. The rules, the hierarchies, the fear. All illusions built by people terrified of seeing how much power they don't have. So you stopped performing. You stopped chasing applause. You became the audience, watching the actors crumble under their own pretenses. You laughed, not out of arrogance, but because you finally understood. This world bends not for those who scream, but for those who see. You didn't have to shout. You didn't have to prove anything. You just had to exist with precision. Every step, every pause, every thought aligned with intent. And that alone bent the stage itself around you. They began to notice the way you entered a room and silence followed, the way your energy spoke louder than 1,000 voices. It wasn't charisma, it was consequence. You carried the weight of self-awareness, and it pressed on everyone else like gravity. They didn't understand what it was, but they could feel it. That your presence made their illusions feel fragile. You didn't demand attention. You made the world remember itself, and so the whispers grew. There's something about them, they said. Something strange, something dangerous. They were right. You'd become a reflection of everything they suppressed. Their rage, their hunger, their lost potential. Looking at you was like staring into the mirror they'd spent their whole lives avoiding. You reminded them of what they could have been if they weren't so afraid. And that's why they tremble now, because they know you've returned from the edge. Not broken, but sharpened. They sense the precision of your thoughts, the cold calm in your voice. You no longer react to the chaos. You orchestrate it. Every silence is deliberate. Every word is a weapon. Every moment is a move on the chessboard they can't even see. They whisper that you've changed. But you didn't change. You became. You evolved beyond the need for validation, beyond the illusions of approval. You no longer seek control. You are control. And as they scramble to understand what happened, you just stand there, smiling faintly, because you already know the truth. You were never trying to win their game. You were designing a new one. They never realized what you were building while they mocked your silence. They thought your absence meant defeat. They didn't know it meant construction. Every moment you disappeared, you were assembling something invisible, precise and unbreakable. You were learning how to move through chaos like a ghost, how to bend situations before they even began, how to let their noise echo off walls that no longer existed around you. You became the architect of unseen outcomes. They built their world on noise, on opinions, on validation loops that kept them alive but hollow. You walked away from all of it. You learned to live in the stillness between decisions, where real power breathes. You discovered that silence is not emptiness. It's weaponized patience, the kind that makes kings tremble because they sense something shifting that they can't name. That's what you became, the shift itself. Every failure, every betrayal, every scar that was meant to break you. You studied it. You dissected pain until it became language, turned heartbreak into calculation. You trained your instincts until they became almost prophetic. You could see moves before they happened. You didn't react to life anymore. You orchestrated it, one invisible gesture at a time. You stopped asking why me and started asking what now. That's when the board flipped. They used to laugh at your dreams. They used to roll their eyes when you spoke about vision. But now, their laughter is gone, replaced with an unease they can't explain. It's because you don't chase anymore. You pull. You became a magnetic field of precision, and now opportunities, power, respect, and even silence align themselves around you. The ones who called you delusional now study your every move, wondering when you changed. But you didn't change. You arrived. You stopped needing permission. You realized the door was never locked. It was just waiting for someone mad enough to stop knocking. And when you walked through, you didn't announce it. The air shifted on its own. People felt it before they understood it. That's what true evolution looks like. Not noise, but presence. They see the results now. Your calm, your control, your command over moments that would have once destroyed you. They can't comprehend how someone who fell that far could stand this straight. But you know the secret. Collapse was your initiation. The abyss didn't swallow you. It crowned you. You stared into the dark, long enough to see the patterns within it. You learned how to read shadows, how to navigate storms, how to find rhythm in destruction. That's why you're unshakable. Now when chaos rises, you don't flinch. You move with precision, almost surgical in the way you navigate tension. You've become what they can't simulate. Authenticity carved in chaos, and the world feels it. That's why doors open without knocking, why silence bends in your favor, why fate seems to wait for your signal before moving. You turned life into an equation that only you can solve. They'll call it luck, they'll call it destiny, but you know it's neither. It's mastery, quiet, disciplined, earned mastery. The kind that doesn't need an audience because it already rewrote the outcome. You don't need them to see your growth because the universe already adjusted itself to make space for your version of reality. You don't chase victories anymore. You breathe them into existence. You don't fight battles. You end them before they start. You're no longer part of their chaos. You're the pulse underneath it, the silent command that makes everything align, and they feel it now. In the way rooms grow heavier when you enter, in the way time slows when you speak. You didn't force it. You became it. You became inevitability. They thought your madness was random. A storm without direction, a spark without meaning, but they never understood the architecture behind it. Every unhinged moment, every wild stare, every word that dripped like venom, it wasn't chaos, it was design. They mistook unpredictability for weakness, never realizing that unpredictability is the highest form of control. Because when no one can predict your next move, no one can cage you. You weren't losing your mind. You were remodeling it. You took it apart, piece by piece, removed the fear, melted the hesitation, and reforged it in silence. And what rose from that? Reconstruction wasn't the same person they laughed at. It was a being whose thoughts no longer obeyed the limits of normal men. You evolved from sanity to strategy, from emotion to execution. Now your presence isn't just seen, it's felt. The air itself seems to tighten when you speak, not because you shout, but because you don't need to. They can sense the voltage beneath your calm. It's the energy of someone who's been through hell and decided to build a throne there. That's what terrifies them. Not your anger, not your power, but your control. They can't understand how someone who burned so many times still glows without smoke. But you know the answer. You stopped fearing the fire. You learned to walk through it without flinching. You realized the flame wasn't the enemy, it was the forge. It didn't consume you, it defined you. And now, every step you take carries the echo of a truth most people will never face. Pain doesn't end you, it evolves you. You no longer run from pain. You recruit it. You make it your ally, your tool, your teacher. Every scar you wear is a signature, not of what hurt you, but of what built you. You turned madness into a map, and it led you straight through the gates of power. Now look at them, the ones who doubted, who whispered, who plotted. They can't look you in the eyes for long, because when they do, they see themselves fragile, uncertain, still playing by rules you shattered years ago. They feel it in their bones that something about you isn't bound by the same physics as them anymore. Your silence carries gravity. Your stillness commands storms. You've become what they secretly wish they could be. Untouchable. And oh, the irony. They called it insanity. They mocked the obsession, the isolation, the refusal to quit. But the masterpiece they now praise was painted in madness. Every brushstroke came from sleepless nights, every layer from pain they couldn't survive. You created what they could never imagine, a version of yourself beyond reach. Now your words cut deeper than any blade, because they don't come from arrogance. They come from proof. Proof that the ones who fall the hardest rise the highest. Proof that chaos, when mastered, becomes order no god can replicate. Proof that sanity is a prison built for small thinkers, and insanity, real, disciplined insanity, is liberation. So when you speak, the world listens, not because you demand attention, but because your existence commands it. You don't inspire, you disturb, you don't motivate, you awaken, and that's the difference. The crowd chases comfort. You offer confrontation. You remind them that every illusion of safety they built is made of glass, and one whisper from you can shatter it. You don't just walk in rooms. You tilt the gravity. Conversations bend toward you. Silence amplifies around you, and even time seems to hesitate, unsure whether to move forward or bow. You've become a living anomaly. Proof that breaking isn't failure, it's transformation. Because that's what they'll never grasp. You didn't escape the darkness. You became fluent in it. You learned to speak its language until it obeyed you. That's not madness, that's mastery. And now, when they ask how you did it, you'll smile that quiet, knowing smile. Because the truth is simple. You stopped trying to be understood. You started being unforgettable. You didn't chase the light. You learned to glow in the dark. They used to say, "You've gone too far," but that's because they never knew how far the edge truly was. You didn't go too far. You went beyond reason, beyond fear, beyond the fragile logic that keeps most men chained to mediocrity. They thought the edge was an ending. You discovered it was a beginning. That's where the real evolution started, where sanity surrendered, and the masterpiece began to breathe. You see, while they clung to comfort, you were dissecting chaos. You studied the cracks in your own reflection, until you learned how to bend them into windows. You turned self-destruction into self-definition. And that's what they'll never comprehend, that sometimes the only way to truly rebuild is to first obliterate. Every night they laughed, every whisper that called you lost, all of it became kindling. You built your identity from their ashes. You didn't heal to forget the fire. You healed to control it. That's what makes you different. They rise to escape their pain. You rise with it. You made pain your co-author, and now your every sentence drips with the ink of survival. And oh, how the tables have turned. Those same voices that once tried to drown you are now echoing your words, imitating your cadence, pretending they never doubted you. But you remember every smirk, every dismissal, every so-called friend who vanished when the sky went black. And now their silence feels poetic. Because you don't need their apology. You already took their disbelief and turned it into gold. That's what separates the ordinary from the inevitable. The ordinary seek validation. The inevitable build proof. You never begged them to understand. You let results do the talking. You let time carve the verdict. And when it did, the judgment was brutal. You were right all along. Now the world watches you with a different kind of fear. The quiet kind. The kind that hums beneath their polite applause, because deep down, they know what you've become isn't supposed to exist. A mind that cracked but didn't crumble, a soul that broke but didn't bleed, a being who walked through every mental inferno and came out with a crown forged from madness itself. You didn't just survive the darkness, you started using it. You understood that fear is just fuel that hasn't been burned yet. That chaos isn't the opposite of control. It's the raw material of power. So you learn to sculpt it. You learn to shape it. And now, every move you make is a storm in disguise. Every word, a calculated explosion. Every silence, a battlefield of restraint. They call it charisma. They call it presence. They don't realize what it really is. Alignment. Your mind, heart, and will no longer argue. They march as one. That's the secret formula. That's why when you speak, even the loudest rooms go still. It's not the tone, it's the truth behind it. Truth that's been baptized in pain, sharpened in isolation, and delivered with unshakable calm. You no longer play by their tempo. You set your own rhythm, and they adapt, subconsciously, helplessly. That's what true power looks like. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand. It bends the world quietly, like gravity. And now look at you, the embodiment of the contradiction they can't compute. Too composed to be broken, too dangerous to be peaceful, too deliberate to be dismissed. You've become the mirror they're afraid to face. Because when they see you, they see the cost of avoiding their own transformation. They see what happens when someone stops waiting for permission to be legendary. You didn't wait for the universe to choose you. You forced it to notice you. You didn't beg fate for a path. You carved one through the concrete. You didn't dream about greatness. You dragged it into existence. That's why they stare in disbelief now. Because what they once called insanity has become your genius. What they mocked as delusion has become your doctrine. And here's the final twist. You don't even need to prove them wrong anymore. You already have. The masterpiece is finished. The chaos has shape. The madness has purpose. You were never crazy. You were becoming. They said you lost your mind, but they never understood. Losing your mind was the only way to find your truth. Sanity was their prison, not your freedom, while they clung to the walls of logic, terrified to look beyond. You stepped into the unknown and found clarity. You didn't go insane. You went deep enough to hear what sanity was too scared to say, and when you came back, you weren't the same. The voice in your head had changed tone. No longer begging for peace, but whispering precision. You didn't need calm anymore. You needed control. Control over the chaos, they said, would consume you. But instead you consumed it. You became fluent in the language of madness, fluent enough to translate it into strategy. Now every scar tells a secret. Every silence speaks a sermon. Every move you make rewrites the physics of their little world. They still call it luck, still label it coincidence, still cling to their illusion that you stumbled into power. But you know the truth. This was crafted. Every twist of fate, every misstep, every downfall was intentional alchemy. You didn't stumble here. You built here, brick by brick, burn by burn. You took every failure like a sculptor takes marble. With patience, precision, and purpose, they mistook your silence for surrender. But that silence, that was architecture. That was the moment the foundation was poured. The masterpiece didn't begin with applause. It began with rejection. And now they look at you and can't explain it. They stare like you're an illusion that logic can't decode. They whisper about timing, talent, luck. They try to rationalize your rise because admitting the truth terrifies them. That your madness was method. That every storm you endured was a calculated baptism. That the line between chaos and creation is thinner than they ever imagined. They mocked your obsession. Now they call it vision. They called you lost. Now they call you limitless. They laughed when you spoke about destiny. Now they quote your words like scripture. Oh, how poetic it is that the very crowd that tried to bury you now lives beneath the shadow of your creation. You see, they were never your enemies. They were your blueprint. Each doubt became a brush stroke. Each betrayal became a contour. Each scar a signature. They gave you the pieces without realizing you were assembling an empire from their disbelief. And now the game has flipped entirely. You no longer walk among them. You move through them. You don't chase validation. Validation follows you. You don't demand respect. It erupts in your presence because power doesn't shout. It shifts the air, and that's what you do now. Your very existence rearranges the room. They used to say, "You've changed." But what they meant was, "You've evolved beyond what we can comprehend." Because that's what happens when the storm becomes sentient, when chaos learns discipline, when madness finds rhythm. You didn't just master your mind, you weaponized it. Now you stand where few dare to look. Beyond the border of fear, beyond the edge of reason. You don't chase destiny anymore. You command it. You don't follow fate. Fate adjusts to your presence. The rules bent, the odds folded, and reality itself began to listen. You are no longer a player in their game. You are the game. Every move, every pause, every word you drop ripples through dimensions of thought they will never touch. You became what they feared most. A mind unchained, a will unbroken, a storm with purpose. So let them talk. Let them label what they can't understand. Let them whisper from the sidelines of the masterpiece they could never paint. Because you already know, this was never insanity. This was evolution in its rawest form. You didn't break the rules. You rewrote them. You didn't go mad. You went beyond. And now, silence follows you like respect does kings. Because the truth they'll never accept is this. Your insanity was never your downfall. It was your crowning design. Your madness was the canvas. Your will was the brush. And the masterpiece was you.